Welcome to this special episode of Firm Learning. If you wish, this is Firm Learning breaking news, because I trust that many of you might already have seen the document from a set of first-year Goldman Sachs analysts that was now published, that was leaked, and is currently making it around the internet. So lots of major news publications have already talked about it. So in this video, I want to do the following thing. We will now jointly look into this document from these first-year Goldman Sachs analysts, and I will reflect on that based on my experience as a former McKinsey consultant, and I will also contrast that of how this compares to working in a tier 1 consulting firm, to working in an MBB consulting firm, so like McKinsey, BCG or Bain or anything of the like. So let's dig into it. So to get to this deck, I just googled Goldman Sachs Working Conditions survey, and then somewhere here it appears. So this is the document that everybody is now indeed talking about. So let's have a look. So what does it say? Working Conditions Survey from Goldman Sachs, February 2021. So apparently, also just to be very clear here, apparently this is not officially been released by Goldman, but rather was created by a set of analysts that they then used and apparently then also distributed to the media. I don't know the details of this, but where they then talk about the working conditions at that firm. And here, of course, it really gets juicy, right? So it says on average, first-year analysts are working over 95 hours per week and sleeping 5 hours per night. And here specifically, when they were asked about how much they worked in the last week, they said that they worked 105 hours. And this is just crazy, because indeed, if you do the calculation, this really means that these people pretty much work every Saturday, every Sunday. And from my friends who work in these very large banks in Frankfurt or London, I know that this is actually the case, right? So it's really expected in many of these firms. Again, don't want to say anything about the specifics on Goldman Sachs, but just in general, what I have heard from people working there, apparently these people really are expected to come into the office every Saturday and every Sunday. And if you are a regular watcher of my channel, you might have already seen this video that I did on the regular work week of a consultant. I will insert it somewhere above here. But if you have seen that, you know that actually this is usually not expected from you in consulting. So based on my former employer, I know that there was a very strong culture of not working at all on the weekend, on Saturday, on Sunday. Of course, then this also relates to sleep, and then at the time where you go to sleep, and apparently here this was 3 a.m. So they say that they sleep 5 hours per night. So I had some weeks in consulting where really the workload was quite high, and I also only 3 a.m. where I went to bed, and I had also a couple of weeks where I really only slept 5 hours on average in that week. So this happened occasionally, but this was for sure not the average. This was really the absolute spike, the absolute outlier. The baseline was much less than that, than what is shown here. Okay, next, near-term retention. So the question is here always, if conditions stay the same, what is the likelihood you'll stay with the firm in 1 month, in 3 months, and in 6 months? From 1 to 10, 10 is high, 1 is low. And of course here you can see that based on that, the likelihood that they will still be at the firm in 6 months is not that high. Though I would argue that this is, given the conditions that are described, still a rather high value, right? So apparently this firm does seem to offer something to these people that at least in some extent might seem it, maybe not bearable, but somehow compensate for what they're experiencing, right? But for sure, this is not looking good. Here, next one, effect on physical and mental health. So how does your mental health change before and after the job? And here as well, what is the development of your physical health before and after the job? And both of them, this is what you see here, always rated from 1 to 10. 10 is the best, with a significant decrease. So for sure, balancing working in consulting with sports, with a healthy lifestyle can be challenging, but if you really make this a priority, it is possible. And personally, I made it always a priority of trying to do at least one time sport during the week, during the work week. I even tried to do it twice every work week. So it didn't happen every single time. It didn't work out every single time, but I made it happen quite frequently. So next, what else are they saying? So here the question, how have your work hours negatively impacted relationships with family and friends? They all said yes, there was some negative impact. And here I must say, probably also in consulting. It's really difficult to say that working consulting will not have any negative effect on your relationships with family and friends, because of course the truth is that in consulting, your normal work week is just that from Monday to Thursday, you are not at home, but you're working client side. And then, of course, if you don't see your family and friends the whole week, this is difficult. And especially if you have a family, this then usually means that you're not seeing your children from Monday to Thursday. This can really be tough. And here maybe the bankers even have the advantage, because even though they come home late, at least they come home every night. Though probably it's not that much of a use if you really only sleep at 3 a.m. and then need to get out in the morning again, right? But here I'd say consulting isn't much better, I must say. Then next, do you feel you've been a victim of workplace abuse? And here a big majority says yes. And here I must say, this is for sure not the atmosphere that I've experienced in consulting. So in consulting, people are really focusing a lot on treating everybody professionally, on treating everybody with respect. So as always, there are also always outliers here as well. And for sure, you will always have some examples of people who cannot behave themselves or whatever. But for sure, this is not systemic to the environment in consulting. I'd rather argue it's exactly the opposite way around. Based on my experiences, I've seen everybody treated with highest levels of respect. So have you frequently experienced unrealistic deadlines, shunned, ignored in meetings, unwarranted, invalid, or public criticism? And here, especially for the first two, a lot of yes here for banking. So unrealistic deadlines, I mean, unrealistic is of course a relative here, right? But tough deadlines for sure is what you will face in consulting as well. So here I'd argue probably very similar. And also unwarranted, invalid, or public criticism. Of course, this is always very relative as well and subjective, right? So probably very rarely somebody gets very tough criticism and will say, yes, this was 100% absolutely justified. I mean, of course, there are these instances, but this will not the norm. So it's a bit difficult. But for sure, where I'd say it's different in consulting is that you are shunned and ignored in meetings. This is not what I've seen. My experience is that really from day one, from being a first week young junior analyst in consulting, you will be encouraged to sit in client meetings, not only sit in client meetings, but actively participate and very quickly also lead these meetings. So this is, I'd say, a big difference. You will be thrown in the water very quickly and will be just expected to just run in these meetings, to lead them, to guide them, to have these client interactions. So this apparently does seem to be different here. Here just goes on and on, blaming without justification, shouting or swearing, excessive monitoring or micromanagement. Here I just want to emphasize my point, especially on the shouting or swearing. Again, there are always outliers, but this for sure is not the norm in consulting. And here also, to be fair, also here only a minority seems to regularly experience these things in banking. So other things, how satisfied are you with your firm, work life, personal life? No surprise that apparently people aren't that satisfied. Now, if you were to move on to another role, how likely would you recommend Goldman Sachs? You're still quite high, interestingly enough. And I guess you can read. I don't find this interesting. And now one slide that is just crazy. I mean, oh, wow, this is so bad. I mean, just read this. I don't even want to read all this out, but just the first one. The sleep deprivation, the treatment by senior bankers, the mental and physical stress. I've been through foster care, and this is arguably worse. This is bad. This is really bad. I mean, then the other ones as well. My body physically hurts all the time, and mentally I'm in a really dark place. I didn't come into this job expecting a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but I also didn't expect consistent 9 a.m. to 5 a.m.s either. And here you can just, read the rest for yourself. This is just crazy. And again, I trust that now you can already sense this from what I've said earlier, but this is not what the reality in consulting looks like. Again, I by no means want to glorify working in consulting. It can be really tough and challenging as well, but not like this. I promise you, maybe there are some peaks, a week or maybe also 2 or 3 weeks, which can be really tough depending on the types of projects that you do. But this for sure will not be the baseline. And even on the toughest weeks, you will not consistently work from 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. This is what I've never seen happen only once on any of the projects that I worked at. This is just what I can say. And in the end, also interestingly enough, they have some suggestions on what to do to rectify the situation. And here as well, I don't want to go too much into the detail, but just here the first one. So 80 hours per week should be considered max capacity. So their demand is to work 80 hours per week. And again, just to contrast this with consulting, I'd argue that probably the average in consulting is around 60 to 65 hours per week. And with ups and downs, there will be weeks where you will also work more than 80 hours, but for sure this is not the baseline. So it is fair to say that apparently working in investment banking seems to be a bit tougher, at least at this specific firm, if this is true, than working in consulting. So of course, now you could also argue that, of course, your salary will be a bit higher in banking, especially also in the long term will be higher in banking than in consulting. And yeah, if you just want to read the rest, feel free. So this is just some reflections on my end. I'd be super happy to hear from you in the comments. Are you working in banking or in consulting? Does this resonate? Does this make sense? Maybe even some insiders from GS or some other firms. Let us know what it's really like, whether this is really the case. And if you've never watched this channel before, my name is Heinrich from Learning. I'm a former McKinsey consultant. Usually on my channel, I talk about how to be successful in the first years of your career. I share tips on slide writing, creating presentations, how to behave in meetings, how to structure your work. So all these things that I learned during my past work experience, where I try to help you with your work life as well. So looking forward, usually I release videos every single Saturday. This was now a bonus video. So looking forward to that. Cheers. This is Hani from Learning. Bye bye.